Mark Collins hurled his phone straight into the floor. The screen shattered on impact, a spiderweb crack splitting right across her name. Victoria Reeves, his boss, his CEO, the most untouchable woman in the building. And he had just sent her 3 words he could never take back. "I love you." The read receipt blinked. She'd seen it. His career, 3 years, 2 promotions. Everything he had built to keep his daughter fed and safe was sitting in the wreckage of a cracked screen. But what Victoria whispered to him 3 months later, standing at his front door in the rain, that was the part nobody saw coming. Drop your city below, subscribe, and let's find out what she said. Mark Collins stared at the shattered screen and felt the exact moment his life split into, before and after. The crack ran diagonally across the glass, right through Victoria Reeves's contact photo. Her sharp blazer, sharper jaw, the expression she wore in every meeting like a weapon she'd never needed to put down. The phone still worked. That was almost worse. The screen still lit up. The message still sat there, delivered red damning. "I love you." Sent at 7:54 a.m. on a Tuesday in March to the woman who signed his paychecks, controlled his future, and had never once, not in 3 years, 4 months and 17 days of his employment at Horizon Marketing, called him anything other than Mark, in a tone that suggested she knew he was a human being. He picked the phone up off the break room floor with both hands. His coffee was still on the counter untouched. Someone had brought donuts. The box was open near the microwave, half empty, the usual Tuesday ritual, and the whole scene was so aggressively normal that it made the disaster in his hand feel even more surreal. "You dropped that?" Dave from accounting appeared in the doorway, peeling the wrapper off a granola bar. "Yeah," Mark said. "Man, those screens go fast. You need a case, brother." "Yeah," Mark said again. Dave disappeared. Mark stood very still and read the message one more time. Then he typed with fingers that weren't entirely steady. "Sorry, that was meant for my daughter. Completely my mistake. I apologize." He hit send. Watched it deliver. Watched the read timestamp appear in under 10 seconds, which meant Victoria was already at her desk, already sharp, already 3 steps ahead of whatever the day was going to bring. She was always first in. He knew that. The whole office knew that. 30 seconds. A minute. He gripped the cracked phone and waited. It buzzed. Victoria Reeves, I assumed. He read it 4 times. I assumed. What did that mean? I assumed it was an accident. I assumed you weren't declaring love to your employer at 7:54 in the morning. I assumed you have a daughter and a life outside this office, and you're not some kind of professional liability in a button-down shirt? He had no idea. And not knowing, standing in the break room with a shattered screen and a cold cup of coffee and the entire professional architecture of his life, suddenly feeling like it was built on sand, was the worst feeling he had experienced in a very long time. He threw the donut box in the trash without taking one. He went back to his desk. He opened his laptop and stared at the screen and told himself to focus, and failed, and tried again. He lasted about 4 minutes before he had to get up and go to the bathroom just to stand somewhere quiet and breathe. There were things Mark Collins had survived that made this technically a small problem. He knew that. He held on to that the way you hold on to a railing on a ship that's rocking, not because it solves anything, but because it's there. 3 years ago, he had stood in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning and listened to a doctor explain that his wife was gone. Sarah. 32 years old. An aneurysm. No warning. No buildup. No chance to say the things he should have said before she walked out the door that last Wednesday morning. She had kissed him on the cheek and grabbed her keys and said, "Don't forget Lily's pediatrician appointment on Thursday." And he had said, "I won't," and that was it. That was the last exchange they ever had. A pediatrician appointment. He had not forgotten. He had taken Lily to that appointment alone 4 days after the funeral, sitting in the waiting room holding her hand while she played with the plastic bead maze and had no idea what had happened to the world. After that, the text message to the wrong contact was objectively a manageable problem. He knew that. But knowing it and feeling it were two different countries, and right now he was stuck at the border. Because the thing about his job, about this job specifically, was that it wasn't just a job. It was the whole architecture. The thing that kept the lights on, and the fridge full, and Lily in the good school district, and Mrs. Patterson paid for after-school care. The thing that got him out of bed at 6 every morning and gave him something to be that wasn't just a man defined by his loss. He had built something here deliberately, methodically, the way you build anything when you can't afford for it to fall carefully brick by brick, no shortcuts. And he had just thrown a grenade into the middle of it because he couldn't slow down long enough to check a contact name. He washed his hands at the bathroom sink and looked at himself in the mirror. "Get it together," he said in the flat, no-nonsense voice he used on himself when nothing else worked. "Go back out there. Do your job. You can't be fired for a wrong text. People have wrong texts all the time." He believed about 60% of that. He went back out anyway. The day stretched in the particular way that dread makes days stretch. Every hour was too long. Every sound from the direction of the executive floor, a door, footsteps, the elevator bell, made the muscles in his shoulders pull tight. He kept waiting for it. The email, the tap on the shoulder, the formal summons. "Mark, can you come see me? Mark, we need to talk. Mark, I think we both know this situation has become untenable." Nothing came. He answered emails. He revised a client deck. He ate lunch at his desk, a sandwich he barely tasted, and watched the clock and told himself he was fine. At 2:30, his colleague Janet dropped into the chair beside his desk, the way she did when she had something to say, and was deciding how to say it. "So," she said. "So," he said. "I heard you cracked your phone this morning." Dropped it. "In the break room." "Yes." She looked at him with the particular expression she wore when she knew more than she was saying and was giving him the opportunity to catch up. "Anything else happened this morning that you want to tell me about?" He kept his eyes on his screen. "Nope." "Because Diane—" Janet paused just long enough. "Victoria's assistant Diane was making coffee at the exact time you were making coffee, and she may have seen your screen before your phone met the floor." He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "How many people know?" "Just me," Janet said. "And Diane. And probably nobody else because Diane is actually the most discreet person in this building and would not say a word, and I am also extremely discreet, obviously." "Janet, when I choose to be which I am choosing to be right now, I just wanted you to know that I know because I am your friend, and I think you look like you haven't breathed properly since this morning." He looked at her then. Janet had been at Horizon for 6 years, had survived 2 restructurings and 1 very public office romance that ended badly, and had a way of seeing through people that she usually deployed with kindness. She was one of the few people here he trusted. "I texted my daughter," he said. "Wrong contact." "I know. It was an accident." "Obviously." She replied, he said. "Victoria. 2 words. And I've been sitting here for 6 hours trying to figure out what they mean." Janet tilted her head. "What did she say?" "I assumed." A pause. Janet turned this over. "Huh," she said. "That's what I said." That's not terrible," Janet said slowly. "I assumed could mean she's not making a thing of it. Or it could mean she assumed the worst and is in the process of consulting HR." "Victoria doesn't consult HR," Janet said. "Victoria makes decisions and then informs HR afterward. That's how she operates." She paused again. "Has she called you in?" "No." "Has she emailed you?" "No." "Then I think," Janet said, standing up, "that you should go home, hug your kid, eat a real dinner and let the thing breathe, because if Victoria Reeves was going to make it into a problem, you would already know about it." He wanted to believe that. He almost did. "Go home, Mark. Janet said. Lily is more important than this. She went back to her desk. He sat with that for a moment. Lily is more important than this. And then he started shutting down his computer, because Janet was right about that part at least. That part was absolutely true. He picked Lily up from Mrs. Patterson's at 6:15. She came out at a dead run, the way she always did, like leaving was a sport she was competing in. Backpack bouncing pigtails, she'd clearly done herself completely uneven. She hit him at the knees like a small missile, and he caught her and swung her up without thinking the automatic choreography of 5 years of this exact moment, even though his back quietly filed a complaint. "Dad!" Her arms around his neck face pressed to his shoulder. "Hey, Bug." He held on a beat longer than usual. "How was school?" She pulled back to look at him with the evaluating expression she'd been using since she was about 4, the one that in Sarah's face had meant she was reading the room. It was unsettling to see it on an 8-year-old. It was also privately one of his favorite things about her. "You look tired," Lily said. "I'm fine." "You look the way you look when something happened at work." He set her down and took her hand and started walking to the car. "Something small happened at work. I handled it. It's fine." "What happened?" "I sent a text to the wrong person." "Who?" "My boss." Lily thought about this for half a block. What did the text say? He glanced down at her. It said, "I love you." A pause. Then Lily erupted into laughter, real laughter, the kind that bent her forward at the waist. She laughed for a solid 30 seconds, while he stood there watching her with an expression he couldn't quite control. "It's not that funny," he said. "It is so funny," she said, straightening up, wiping her eye with her sleeve. "Dad, you told your boss you love her." "I told you I love you. I just sent it to the wrong contact." "Does she know that?" "I texted her right after and explained." "What did she say?" "She said..." He paused at the car door. "She said she assumed." Lily's nose scrunched. "What does that mean?" "I genuinely do not know," Mark said. "Get in the car." She got in, still grinning. He buckled his seatbelt and started the engine and looked at her in the rearview mirror. This little person who was simultaneously the hardest and the best thing in his life. And he felt the day's tension do something it had refused to do all afternoon. It started to loosen. "I'm glad you think my suffering is entertaining," he said. "Mom would have thought it was funny too," Lily said simply, and went back to looking out the window. He kept his eyes on the road. The sentence landed the way her references to Sarah always did, not with a crash, but with a slow, spreading warmth and ache that occupied the same space in his chest. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." They drove home through the amber evening, and Lily chattered about school, about Madison, and the horse drawing, about how she'd decided she wanted to learn to play drums, which was a conversation he would need to table for later. He listened and responded in the right places, and let her fill the car with her noise, and by the time they pulled into the driveway, something in him had settled enough to function. After dinner, after homework, after he'd read to her and turned off the light and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, the way he always did, Lily said in the quiet, drowsy voice she used right at the edge of sleep, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Is your boss nice?" He considered the question honestly. "I don't know yet." "Maybe she will be," Lily said. "Maybe," he said. She was asleep in 3 minutes. He sat there in the dark a little longer, and he didn't let himself think about Victoria Reeves, or I assumed, or the strange, unclassifiable moment in the break room when the whole professional structure of his life had felt unexpectedly fragile. He thought about Lily. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the next morning, and the morning after that, and the small continuous work of keeping everything standing. Then he went to bed. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. I assumed. What did she assume? He didn't sleep well. He brought the Westfield proposal to Victoria's office at 8:40 on Wednesday morning, 20 minutes early, because he was constitutionally incapable of being anything else. Diane waved him in. Victoria was on a call, standing at the window with her back to the door, one hand at her side, voice low and clipped. "That's not what we agreed to in January," she said into the phone. "Pull the original contract. Page 7, Clause 4. Call me back when you've read it." She hung up, turned, saw him. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, not in any way most people would notice, but he was watching closely enough to catch it. A very brief recalibration, something tucked away. "Mark," she said, "I have the Westfield proposal." He set it on the desk. "Revised opening line as you asked." She picked it up without sitting down and read standing. He waited. The silence in her office was a different kind of silence from the rest of the building, denser somehow, like the air itself was paying attention. "Better," she said when she got to page 4. "This is significantly better." She kept reading. Then, "Sit down." He sat. She finished the document, set it down, and looked at him across the desk, with the expression he was beginning to recognize, the one that didn't mean anything he could fully decode yet. "Westfield is going to be a full pitch cycle," she said. "Presentation in Chicago, April 28th. I want you running lead." "I can do that." "It's not just the pitch." She sat down now, folding her hands on the desk. "If we land this account, there's a follow-up engagement structure, 6 months at minimum. Travel client meetings, the whole cycle. You understand what you're agreeing to?" "I do," he said. "Your daughter." She said it directly without softening or avoiding it. "You have arrangements for travel." "I can make arrangements," he said. "Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, can cover short trips. Anything longer I'd need to plan ahead." "Chicago is 3 nights, Victoria said. "The 28th through the 31st. She paused. "That's sufficient lead time to arrange something." "Yes," he said. "Diane will send you the information about Horizon's childcare resource network this afternoon. Use it if you need it. That's what it's there for." She picked up the proposal again, closed it, slid it back across the desk. "Final version by Friday. Clean, no errors." "Friday," he confirmed. He stood to go. "Mark." He stopped. She was looking at him with that same careful attention, the kind that felt like being read by someone who read quickly and retained everything. "Yesterday," she said, "I want you to understand, I don't hold mistakes against people. I hold how people handle mistakes. You handled it cleanly." She held his gaze. "That matters more to me than the mistake itself." He stood with that for a moment. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in a way that was hard to articulate. She nodded once, already moving on. Friday. He walked back to his desk. He sat down. He let out a slow breath, long and quiet, the kind he'd been holding for almost 48 hours. Janet appeared at the edge of his workspace 5 minutes later, coffee in hand, eyebrows raised. "Well," she said. "I still have a job," Mark said. "Obviously." Janet sat down. And she's putting me on Westfield, lead." Janet stared. "Westfield, the national account." "That one." "Mark." She said his name in the tone of someone recalibrating. "She gave you the biggest account in the building." "Apparently." "After the text." "After the text." Janet was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't think that's a coincidence." "It's not a reward for sending my boss an accidental love text," he said flatly. "It's because she thinks I'm right for the account." "Those two things," Janet said carefully, "are not necessarily mutually exclusive." "Janet, I'm just saying." "Don't just say me," he told her. "Let me do my job." She stood smiling in the particular way she smiled when she thought she was right and was willing to wait. Friday deadline on the Westfield pitch. Friday. "Then you better get moving." She paused. "And maybe buy a phone case." She walked away. He turned back to his screen. He opened the Westfield file and pulled up the proposal and read through it from the top, the way he always approached something important from the beginning. clean, no assumptions, just the work in front of him. He could do this. He had always been able to do this. The text message, the shattered phone, the two-word reply that had kept him awake 2 nights running, all of it was behind him. He was on solid ground. He knew who he was and what he was doing and what it was for. He started to work. He did not think about the way she had said, "I don't hold mistakes against people." He did not think about the half-second shift in her expression when he'd mentioned Lily. He told himself very firmly that none of that was relevant. He almost believed it. The Westfield proposal landed on Victoria's desk at 9:14 on Friday morning, 11 minutes before the deadline, clean and error-free. Mark had spent Thursday night at the kitchen table, after Lily went to bed, going through it line by line with a red pen, the way his college professor used to, looking not for what was there, but for what was missing. He found 3 things. He fixed them. He printed a fresh copy and went to bed at midnight, feeling the particular satisfaction of work done right. Victoria sent him a 2-line email at 11 Friday morning. "Solid work. We move forward." That was it. No praise, no elaboration. With another boss, he might have wanted more. With Victoria, he'd already started to understand that 2 lines was significant. The next 3 weeks moved the way big project weeks always moved, fast, when you were inside them, relentless, one thing feeding into the next. Mark built the pitch deck. He researched Westfield's brand history, their market position, the 3 campaigns they'd run in the last 5 years that hadn't hit the way they'd hoped, and why. He called 2 contacts he had at competing firms casual. No specifics, just to understand the competitive landscape. He stayed late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the night's misses. Patterson could keep Lily until 8, and he worked with the focused, quiet intensity that had always been his best professional quality. Janet called it Mark going dark. She meant it as a compliment. When he was deep in something, he went quiet, tunneled in, surfaced only when he had what he needed. She left snacks on his desk during those stretches. He always ate them and never acknowledged them, which she said was fine. What he didn't account for was Victoria. She requested 3 check-ins over the following 2 weeks, not full meetings, just 15-minute touchpoints, standing at the small table in her office, going through the deck section by section. He had expected her to be surgical, critical, the kind of boss who identifies every weakness and hands it back to you like a verdict. She was those things, but she was also something else he hadn't prepared for. She was engaged. Not performed engagement, not the professional simulation of interest. She asked questions that showed she'd read everything he'd sent. Thought about it pushed further. What does Westfield actually want here? Is it reach or reputation? Because those are different pitches, and right now you're splitting the difference and losing both. She was right. He reworked that section entirely. She came back 2 days later and said, "Now it's a pitch." She also, in those 15-minute windows, occasionally did something he couldn't quite categorize. She asked about Lily. Not heavily. Not in a way that felt intrusive or performed. Just sometimes at the end of a check-in, when the work conversation had wound down and he was gathering his notes to leave, she would say something small. "How's Lily doing with school?" Or, "Did she figure out the horse-drawing situation?" He always answered briefly, and she always listened with that same still-focused attention she brought to everything, and then they moved on. He didn't analyze it. He filed it and moved on. He was very good at filing things and moving on. He had been practicing for 3 years. The childcare information Diane sent him turned out to be more substantial than he'd expected. Horizon had a partnership with a network of vetted background-checked childcare providers, specifically for employees who traveled for work, short-term, flexible, professionally managed. He read through the documentation twice, surprised. He had assumed it was a token gesture, a line item in an employee benefits pamphlet that nobody used. Instead, it was a real functioning system with references and placement coordinators and a response time of 48 hours for travel arrangements. He called the coordinator a woman named Ellen, who was no-nonsense and efficient, and had clearly done this exact conversation 100 times. She walked him through the process, asked him Lily's age and schedule, and any relevant preferences, and said she'd have 2 potential matches for him within the week. "Your company has been using us for 3 years, Ellen said. Your CEO set up the partnership herself." He paused. "Victoria Reeves set this up." "About 2.5 years ago," Ellen said. "She's been pretty hands-on about making sure the program actually functions, not just exists on paper. Most corporate childcare benefits are useless in practice. She wanted this one to actually work." He thanked Ellen and hung up and sat with that information for a minute. 2.5 years ago, before he was even promoted to a level where travel was a factor, before she would have had any particular reason to think about him or his situation. She had built this program for employees in general, for anyone navigating what he was navigating, and the fact that it existed and functioned was because she'd made it function. He hadn't expected that. He didn't know what to do with it. He filed it. The third check-in 2 weeks before Chicago ran longer than the others. They'd moved past the deck and into the presentation strategy who would be in the room at Westfield. What they responded to, how to read the first 5 minutes and adjust. Victoria had done her own research. She'd met the Westfield CFO at a conference 2 years prior and described him in 3 sentences that were more useful than everything Mark had found in public records. "He's not going to be moved by data alone," she said. "He already has data. What he wants is confidence. He wants to believe the people across the table from him have made up their minds and don't need his approval to feel good about the work. So don't pitch," Mark said. "Present." "Exactly." She looked at him steadily. "Can you do that?" "Yes." She held the look a half-second longer than necessary. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," he said. And he said it the way she'd described, not asking for her approval, just stating a fact. He watched something in her expression shift almost imperceptibly, in a way that might have been satisfaction. "Good," she said. And then completely without transition, "I'll be in Chicago." He looked up from his notes. "You're coming to the Westfield pitch?" "I'll be at the Chicago office that week for the Galveston account review. Different building, different client. But I'll be in the city." She paused. "If the pitch runs into trouble, it's useful to have backup." "It won't run into trouble," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I'll be there anyway." He nodded and wrote nothing down, because there was nothing to write. He gathered his materials and stood up. He was at the door when she said, not quite in her normal register, something slightly quieter, slightly less armored. "Mark, you're ready for this." He turned. She was looking at her desk, already moving to the next thing. "I know," he said, and he walked out. He got as far as the hallway before he had to stop and put one hand on the wall and just stand there for a second, because something was happening in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time and wasn't sure he had the vocabulary for anymore. He straightened up. He went back to his desk. He did not mention it to Janet. He did not think about it again for the rest of the day. He almost managed that. The weekend before Chicago, Mark told Lily about the trip over breakfast. He'd been building up to it in the careful way he handled anything that disrupted her routine, slow approach. Honest information room for her to have feelings about it without those feelings derailing anything. "I have to go to Chicago for work," he said. 3 nights. I'll be back Thursday." Lily was eating cereal with the focused efficiency of someone who had places to be. She looked up. "Mrs. Patterson." "Actually, someone different this time. Her name is Carol. She's been doing this a long time and she's—" He checked himself. He had Carol's references memorized. He didn't need to recite them to his 8-year-old. "She's good. You'll like her." Lily considered this. "Will she know where my soccer stuff is?" "We'll show her before I leave." "Does she make breakfast?" "She does." "What kind?" "I can ask," he said. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to her cereal. He watched her for a moment. This small person, who had learned to adapt to things no child should have to adapt to, who met change with practical questions about soccer gear and breakfast, and felt the familiar mix of pride and heartache that was just part of the texture of loving her. "You'll be okay," he said. Not a question. "I'm always okay," Lily said. She said it without drama, without self-pity, in the uncomplicated tone of someone stating a fact. He had no idea if she'd learned that from him or invented it herself. He suspected a little of both. "I love you, Bug," he said. She looked up at him with a grin. "Is that for me or your boss?" "You are deeply unpleasant sometimes," he told her. She laughed and finished her cereal. He introduced Lily to Carol on Sunday afternoon, a woman in her late 50s, practical and warm, with the easy authoritative manner of someone who had been doing this for 20 years and had seen everything. Lily gave her the full evaluation treatment for the first 10 minutes, asking questions that were technically about logistics, but were clearly also character assessments. Carol answered all of them directly without condescension, and at some point during the tour of the kitchen, Lily apparently made her decision because she stopped interrogating and started showing Carol her dinosaur sticker collection, which meant she'd been accepted. Mark stood in the doorway watching them and felt the tightness in his chest ease by a few degrees. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop open to the pitch deck, going through it one final time. He had the presentation memorized. He knew it the way you knew the route to the grocery store automatically, without effort, every turn in place. He closed the laptop and just sat. He thought about Sarah the way he always thought about her before something important. Not with the sharp, tearing grief of the first year, or even the dull, persistent ache of the second, but with something that had slowly become more like gratitude. She had been the person who believed he was capable of more than he thought he was. She used to say more than once in the particular way she said things that mattered quietly, directly, like she was simply reporting the truth. "You think you need a safety net, Mark. You don't. You never have." He had argued with her every time she said it. He hadn't believed her. He was starting to think she might have been right. He carried that with him to Chicago. The Monday morning flight was 6:45, which meant he was up at 4:30, dressed and packed and double-checking everything he'd already checked the night before. He looked in on Lily before he left. She was deeply asleep, one arm flung out, her face completely relaxed. He stood in the doorway for a minute without turning on the light. "Be good," he said quietly. "I'll be back Thursday." She didn't stir. He went. The Westfield offices in Chicago were on the 22nd floor of a glass building downtown, and by the time Mark walked in at 10:50 for an 11 o'clock meeting, he had already been through the mental preparation a dozen times and was done with preparation. He was in present tense now. Awake, ready, the good, clean readiness that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with knowing your material. There were 4 people on the Westfield side of the table. Richard Park, the CFO Victoria had described. A marketing director named Susan, who had a notepad and a pen and used both. 2 younger team members who were there to observe, and whose names Mark noted and used deliberately throughout the presentation, because people notice when you remember their names. He stood up and he presented. Not pitched. Presented. The distinction Victoria had drawn was real, and he felt it in the room from the first 2 minutes, the shift in posture on the other side of the table, the way Richard Park's initial careful blankness started to open into something that looked like attention. He talked for 22 minutes, took 8 questions, answered 7 directly, and acknowledged the 8th was still being developed, which was the honest answer. And Richard Park nodded at that, like it was the right call. At the end of it, Richard Park looked at him across the table and said, "We'll be in touch by end of week." It was a standard close, but he said it while leaning forward slightly, which wasn't standard. And Susan had written 4 pages of notes, which was not nothing. Mark thanked them, shook hands with everyone, including the junior team members, walked to the elevator and rode it down 22 floors, and stood on the sidewalk in the Chicago wind and pulled out his phone. He had a text. He didn't recognize the number. He opened it. How did it go? He stared at it. Then he noticed the initial at the bottom of the message, VR Victoria, using a number he didn't have in his contacts. He didn't stop to wonder how she had his number. She was the CEO. She had everyone's number. He just typed back. I think it went well. Park was engaged. We'll know by Friday. 3 dots appeared. Then Park doesn't engage easily. Good sign. He looked at the phone for a moment. Then, are you still in the city? 3 dots. Galveston meeting ran late. Heading to the hotel. You. He looked up at the Chicago skyline, the wind moving through the streets, the city loud and indifferent around him. He thought about going back to his hotel room and eating room service, and reviewing his notes for a debrief he'd already mentally completed. Same, he typed. Then, before he could talk himself out of it. There's a place 2 blocks from the Marriott with good coffee, if you haven't eaten. He hit send, stared at the sidewalk, wondered what he was doing. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I haven't eaten. He put the phone in his pocket and started walking. The place was small, the kind that Chicago did well. Exposed brick, actual good coffee, a menu written on a chalkboard that changed with what was available. He got there first and took a corner table and ordered 2 coffees and told himself this was a professional courtesy, a colleague in the same city, a brief meal. Victoria walked in 7 minutes later. She was in a different blazer than he'd ever seen her wear, slightly less formal, slightly more human. The difference between the armor she wore for the office and what she put on when the office was technically not watching. Her hair was down. He had never seen her hair down. He had no idea what to do with that information, so he looked at the coffee menu on the wall instead. She sat across from him. The waiter came. She ordered a club sandwich with the slightly self-conscious manner of someone who was used to deciding things and found minor choices like sandwiches mildly irritating. The Galveston meeting, he said. How'd it go? They want to renew. They'll negotiate the terms down to the wire because that's what Gary Marsh does every single year, and every year I let him negotiate for exactly 1 round before I stop moving. She picked up her coffee. He knows the routine by now. It's almost comfortable. Sounds almost like a relationship, Mark said, and immediately wondered if that was the wrong word. Victoria looked at him. Something moved through her expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. It's been 6 years, she said. At some point, it probably qualifies. He laughed short and genuine. She looked slightly surprised by it, not by the laugh itself, but by her own response to it, like she hadn't expected to find it easy to sit here. Your daughter, she said after a beat. She's in good hands while you're here. Carol, he said. She came highly recommended. Lily approved her after a fairly rigorous interview. What does that look like, an 8-year-old's rigorous interview? She asked Carol her opinion on dinosaurs, Mark said, and whether she thought a horse drawing could also look like a potato. Victoria set her coffee down. What's the right answer? Carol said that all great art has multiple interpretations. A pause. Smart woman. Lily showed her the sticker collection within 10 minutes. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking at the table in a way that suggested she was somewhere else, briefly, somewhere internal behind the glass. Then she came back. She sounds like a good kid, she said. Lily. She's the best person I know, Mark said simply. He meant it without weight or performance, just the plain fact of it. Victoria looked at him then, and whatever the expression was, he still didn't have the full vocabulary for her expressions. He was still learning the language. It was unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before. Not vulnerable exactly, more like honest, like she had set something down for a minute and wasn't immediately reaching to pick it back up. You do this alone, she said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It was something in between the way you say a thing when you're deciding whether to say the rest of it. 3 years, he said. Since her mother. Yes. She held his gaze. He didn't look away. The noise of the restaurant moved around them, and neither of them spoke for a moment. And in that moment, something shifted between them, not dramatically, not with any declaration or signal. Just a door somewhere, opening the smallest amount. "That's a long time to hold everything up by yourself," Victoria said. "You figure it out," Mark said. "You have to." She nodded once slowly, like she understood that in a way that went deeper than the professional context. He thought about asking her something. He thought about it, weighed it, and then said it anyway, because the moment felt like the kind that didn't come twice. "What about you?" he said. "Do you have family outside work, I mean?" She looked at her sandwich. "My mother in Connecticut. We talk on Sundays." A pause. "That's largely the extent of it." He waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. He didn't push. "Sunday calls or something," he said. "She mostly talks about her garden," Victoria said, and for a fraction of a second something that was definitely a real smile crossed her face. Not the managed, controlled, near smile he'd seen in the office, but an actual one, brief and private. "She's been trying to grow tomatoes for 9 years. They never come in right. She's very determined about it." "Lily's been trying to grow a sunflower on the windowsill for 6 months," Mark said. Same energy. Victoria looked at him. "Is it working?" "There's something green happening," he said. "We're cautiously optimistic." She laughed. Quiet, short, real. He felt it land somewhere in the middle of his chest and do something he wasn't prepared for. They ate and talked for another 40 minutes, mostly about work. The Westfield follow-up, the Q3 projections, the restructuring of the West Coast team that had been in discussion for months. Safe ground, professional ground, the kind of conversation he knew how to have. But underneath it, running parallel to all of it, was the other thing. The door that had opened a small amount and had not closed. When they left, standing on the sidewalk in the Chicago evening, she pulled her coat closed against the wind and looked at him with something clear and direct. "Good luck Friday," she said, with the Westfield response. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it. The proposal support, the check-ins." He paused. "Carol, the childcare program." She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me for things that should exist," she said. "They should exist. That's why they do." And she turned and walked toward the hotel, and he watched her go, and stood there in the Chicago wind with his hands in his pockets, and thought about a woman who built programs for people she didn't know yet, who grew tomatoes badly in Connecticut, who had hair he hadn't known about until tonight, who said, "Don't thank me for things that should exist," like it was the most natural sentence in the world. He walked back to his hotel. He called Lily, who told him about Carol's pancakes and a very detailed dream involving dinosaurs and a shopping mall, and he listened to every word of it and laughed in the right places, and told her he'd be home Thursday. He hung up and lay in the dark for a long time. He was not ready for this. He knew that. He knew it the way you know things about yourself that you've had to learn the hard way, not theoretically, not as an idea, but in the body, in the place where grief and fear live alongside each other. He was not ready. He was certain of that, but the door had opened, and he hadn't closed it. The Westfield call came on Friday at 4:17 in the afternoon. Mark was at his desk pretending to review a media budget spreadsheet when his phone lit up with a Chicago area code. He answered on the second ring. "Mark." It was Richard Park's voice, measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who had made his decision well before this call and was simply delivering the verdict. "We've reviewed the presentations from all 3 firms. We'd like to move forward with Horizon." Mark put his pen down carefully. "I'm glad to hear that, Richard." "Your approach was different from the others," Park said. "Most people come in and tell us what they think we need. You came in and told us what you'd actually figured out about us. That's a harder thing to do." A pause. "We appreciate that." "We'll do good work for you," Mark said. "I can promise you that." "I believe you," Park said. "Have your team reach out to Susan next week to start the engagement structure. We want to move quickly." He hung up. Mark sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. Then he stood up, walked to Janet's desk, and said in a voice that was deliberately even, "We got Westfield." Janet looked up. For 1 second, she just stared at him. Then she made a sound that was somewhere between a word and a yell, and several heads turned in the open office, and Mark said, "Keep it professional," but he was smiling when he said it. He sent Victoria a one-line email. Westfield confirmed. Park called at 4:17. We're in. He sat back down and waited. Her reply came in 4 minutes. Also one line. I knew it would. And then a minute later, a second email separate that said simply, "Good work, Mark." He read it twice, filed it in the place where he was keeping things he didn't have vocabulary for yet, and went to tell the rest of the team. That evening he drove to pick up Lily with the window down, the April air finally warm enough to mean it, and when she came running out of Mrs. Patterson's, she stopped short when she saw his face and said, "Something good happened." "Something good happened," he confirmed. She climbed in the car and buckled her seatbelt with the focused efficiency she'd inherited from him. The work thing. The work thing. The Chicago work thing. The same one. She thought about this. "Does that mean we get ice cream?" "It means we get ice cream," he said. She raised both fists in the air. He drove to the ice cream place on Clement Street, the one they'd been going to since she was 5, and could barely see over the counter. And they sat in the window with their cones, and Lily told him at length about a conflict at recess involving a jump rope and what she considered a clear injustice, and he listened to every word of it with the particular attentiveness that this kind of evening deserved, the kind where something had gone right, and the two of them were together, and the light outside was long and golden, and he let himself just be inside it for once, without already thinking about the next thing. These were the moments he held on to. These exact ones. He held this one. The Westfield engagement started the following Monday, and consumed the next 3 weeks in the best possible way, the kind of work that had traction, that moved, that showed results. Mark ran the account with a core team of 4, and he ran it the way he ran everything, methodically, relentlessly, with a standard for follow-through that some people found exhausting, and clients found deeply reassuring. Victoria checked in on the account every week in their regular touchpoint. She was helpful in those meetings in a way that was new, less directive than she'd been before Chicago, more collaborative, asking his read on things before offering her own. He noticed the shift and wasn't sure what to do with it, so he treated it as professional trust and left it there. What he couldn't leave there was everything else. She had started stopping by his workspace. Not frequently, not in a way that anyone would particularly remark on, once, twice a week briefly, on the way to somewhere else. She'd set a coffee on his desk without comment and keep walking. Or she'd pause and say, "Westfield brief looks good." Or, "I read your notes on the Q3 restructure, come see me Thursday." Small things, professional things. Except they kept happening and they were accumulating, and Mark was not a man who missed patterns. Janet noticed. Of course she did. She mentioned it exactly once on a Wednesday afternoon, when Victoria had walked by Mark's desk for the second time that day, this time asking a question about a media buy that she almost certainly could have emailed about. "I'm not saying anything," Janet said when Victoria was out of earshot. "You are definitely saying something," Mark said. "I'm saying nothing, absolutely nothing." She sipped her coffee. "I'm just sitting here observing that our CEO, who has walked past this row of desks approximately never in the 3 years I have worked here, has now walked past it twice before lunch on a Wednesday. She has questions about the Westfield account." "She has a phone," Janet said, "and email, and a very capable assistant who could relay questions." Janet. "I'm not saying anything," she repeated, and went back to her screen with an expression that said she had said everything she needed to say. He didn't respond to that. He couldn't. Because the honest answer was that he knew. He had known since Chicago, since the small restaurant 2 blocks from the Marriott, since the door that had opened and hadn't closed. He knew, and he also knew, that knowing was not the same as being ready, and he was not ready, and he was not going to talk about being not ready with Janet, because once he said it out loud, it became a real problem, and right now it was still something he could manage by not naming it. The thing about not being ready was that it wasn't simple. It wasn't just fear or grief or the practical complications of his life. It was something more specific than all of that. It was loyalty. He had loved Sarah completely, not perfectly. They were two real people. They had disagreements. They had weeks where the friction of two careers and a small child and not enough sleep made everything harder, but completely. He had chosen her and kept choosing her, and when she died he had grieved her with the same completeness. And there was a part of him that had privately, without ever stating it, made a kind of promise that she would remain the person. That whatever else happened, whatever the rest of his life looked like, she would not be replaced. She would not be competed with. She would not be made lesser by his moving forward. He knew on the level where rational understanding lived that this was not how it worked. That loving someone new did not diminish loving the person you had lost. Sarah herself had said something once, not about herself, about a widowed friend of theirs who had eventually remarried, that had stuck with him. You don't stop loving one person to start loving another. Your heart isn't a house with one room, it just builds another room. He knew she had said that. He could hear her voice saying it. He even believed it in the abstract. But the abstract was not where he was living. He was living in the specific. In the morning of April 22nd, which came that year on a Saturday, and which was the third anniversary of the day, he had stood in a hospital hallway and understood that his life had fractured permanently into before and after. He had no ritual for this day. He had made himself not have rituals because he'd been warned by a grief counselor in the first year that rituals could become walls, could become ways of staying inside the grief instead of moving through it. What he had instead was a practice of presence. He spent the day with Lily wherever she wanted to go, doing whatever she wanted to do. He let her lead. He let her set the pace. She almost always chose something ordinary, the park, the library, cooking something together, and he thought that was its own kind of wisdom. The wisdom of children who understand instinctively that the best antidote to unbearable days is the ordinary weight of living. This year, she wanted to go to the botanical garden. She'd been talking about it for 2 weeks ever since a unit at school on plant biology had ignited a fascination that was for the moment competing with her interest in dinosaurs. He drove them there in the morning, and they spent 3 hours walking the paths, and Lily asked questions of every placard they passed with the relentless inquisitiveness she brought to anything that interested her, and he answered what he knew. And they looked up the rest on his phone, and somewhere in the second hour he felt the familiar shift of this particular day, the way the weight of it didn't go away, but became for stretches manageable. Distributed. Carried differently. They stopped for lunch at a food cart near the rose section. Hot dogs and lemonade sitting on a bench in the April sun. Lily was quiet for a moment, which with her was always intentional. She was not a child who went quiet by accident. "I was thinking about Mom today," she said. "Me too," he said. "Do you think she would have liked it here?" "She loved gardens," he said. "She used to grow tomatoes." The word tomatoes landed oddly as he said it, a small strange echo of a different conversation. He let it pass. "How come we don't grow tomatoes?" "We're working on the sunflower first," he said. "One thing at a time." Lily leaned against his arm. He put his arm around her, and they sat in the sun for a while without talking, and he felt the full weight of the day, the grief and the gratitude, and the strange, complicated love of being present for this small person who was, in the most precise sense, he knew the best of what he and Sarah had made together. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah. It's okay," she said, simply, without elaboration. He looked down at her. "What's okay?" She tilted her head up at him with the clear-eyed steadiness that occasionally made her seem ageless. "Whatever you're thinking about," she said. "It's okay." He held her tighter and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would have been adequate. They drove home in the late afternoon, Lily asleep in the back seat inside of 15 minutes, and he pulled into the driveway and sat in the parked car in the quiet, not ready to go inside yet. The day always ended like this. The last stretch, the part that had no activity to move through, just the hours between dinner and sleep, when the stillness got loud. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Chicago area code again, but no. He realized when he looked more carefully, not the same as Park's number. A different one. He opened the text. I know today is the 3rd anniversary. I hope you and Lily are okay. He read it 3 times. He sat completely still in the parked car for a long moment. There was only one person this could be from. And the question of how she knew the date, the anniversary, that specific information was something he could work out later. Right now, he was sitting with the fact of it. That she had known. That she had thought about it. That she had chosen on today of all days to reach across the professional distance and say simply, plainly, without flourish, I hope you're okay. He typed back slowly. We're okay. Had a good day. Thank you for, I don't know, thinking of it. He stared at the screen. Added, how did you know 3 dots? Then Janet mentioned it once. A while back. I kept the date. He looked at those words. I kept the date. The deliberateness of that. The quiet private act of keeping something that wasn't hers to keep and being gentle with it anyway. He thought about what to say. He could keep it brief. He could say thank you, good night, close the door on it cleanly, the way he was practiced at closing doors. He could do that. He had been doing that for 3 years. He typed, she would have made a good garden, Sarah. She had the patience for it. He stopped, read it back, added, I think you would have gotten along. Then he stared at that sentence for 15 seconds and thought about whether he was about to cross something. He sent it anyway. 3 dots. A long pause. Then, that means something, Mark. That you said that. He didn't reply right away. He just sat with it in the car until Lily stirred in the back seat and said, Are we home? And he said yes and got out and opened her door and carried her inside, even though she was probably too old for it, and she let him half asleep, her head on his shoulder, the same way she'd been letting him carry her since she was 3 years old, and the world had cracked open, and he'd had to hold the pieces together with both hands. He put her to bed. He went to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water and stood at the counter and read the text exchange one more time. That means something, Mark. That you said that. He understood now that the door wasn't just open. He had walked through it. He didn't know when exactly, maybe Chicago, maybe the check-ins, maybe the coffee left silently on his desk, maybe the program that existed because she'd made sure it existed, but he was through it, and the geography on this side was different from what he'd expected. It wasn't simpler. He had thought in the abstract that when he was finally ready, it would feel lighter relief maybe, or clarity. What it actually felt like was more complicated and more real. It felt like being alive in a way he had kept himself from being alive in, carefully, deliberately for a long time. And that was terrifying in the particular way that things are terrifying when they're real and not abstract anymore. He was in love with Victoria Reeves. He understood that now, standing in his kitchen at 8:40 on the 3rd anniversary of Sarah's death, with a clarity that was the opposite of comfortable. He was in love with her, and he had no idea what she felt, and no clear framework for how to exist inside that uncertainty. And there was a voice in the back of his mind. Sarah's voice, if he was honest with himself, that was saying something he couldn't quite make out yet. Something like, Mark, stop overthinking it. Something like, you already know. Something like, build another room. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. The following week at work had a different quality. He was aware of himself in the office in a way he hadn't been before, aware of the space between him and Victoria, the geometry of where she was and where he was, the texture of their interactions. He knew this was internal. He knew she couldn't see the shift in him. He kept his face neutral and professional and showed up to the Westfield check-in on Tuesday, as he always did. Notes prepared, questions ready. She walked in and sat down and looked at him and said, You look like you slept better this week. He had not slept particularly well. I'm fine, he said. The Westfield mid-month reporting looks good, she said, opening the folder. The campaign metrics from week 1 are already tracking above their internal benchmark. Park's team sent me a note. Good, he said. She looked up from the folder. Something in his register had come through, something she'd noticed. She studied him for a moment with that reading expression, the one he'd spent months learning to identify. You okay? Yes, he said. Then, because she was still looking at him with that directness that made dishonesty feel both useless and slightly disrespectful, I've been thinking. About what? He met her eyes. About Chicago. About a lot of things. The room was quiet. She set the folder down. Mark, she said. I'm not saying anything right now, he said carefully. I want to be clear about that. This isn't a conversation that I'm trying to start in your office on a Tuesday morning. I just want you to know that I've been thinking. She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her fully. He still couldn't. He'd probably never be able to read her the way he could read Lily, or Janet, or the people whose language he'd spent years learning. But there was something in her face that was open in the way it had been open in Chicago, that same quality of having put something down and not reaching to pick it back up. I've been thinking too, she said quietly. And then, with the characteristic Victoria move of closing a door precisely when it had been cracked, most honestly, she picked the folder back up. Westfield numbers. Walk me through the week 2 projections. He picked up his notes. Week 2. They worked through the rest of the meeting. Professional, focused, exactly as they always were. But something had been said that hadn't been said before, and they both knew it, and the knowledge of it sat in the room between them, like something that was done growing and just waiting. He walked out of her office at the end of the check-in and went back to his desk and worked until 6 when he packed up and drove to get Lily. She was sitting on Mrs. Patterson's front steps when he pulled up. Not running this time, just sitting with her elbows on her knees and her chin in her hands watching the street. She saw his car and stood up, and her face did the thing it always did. The genuine, uncomplicated happiness of a child who was glad to see her parent, the thing no age or trouble or grief had managed to dim in her. She got in the car, buckled her seatbelt, looked at him. You still look like something's happening, she said. He glanced at her in the rear view. You're very perceptive. I know, she said without any particular ego in it. Is it the work thing still, or is it something else? He was quiet for a moment, watching the road. Then, something else. She thought about this. Is it the lady, your boss? He kept his eyes on the road. Why would you ask that? Because, Lily said with the particular patience she used when she thought he was being slow. You said she texted you on the day we went to the garden. And you had a weird face when you were on your phone. And then you looked at me and said, "It's okay, Bug." But I didn't say anything was wrong. She paused. So either you were talking to yourself, or you were thinking about something, and you were trying to make both of us feel better. He drove in silence for a block. You're 8 years old, he said. 8.5, she said. He exhaled slowly. The evening was warm, the windows down the city easing into dusk around them. I don't know yet what it is, he said finally. I'm still figuring it out. That's okay, Lily said. Mom used to say you figure things out better when you stop trying so hard to figure them out. He looked at her in the mirror again. When did she say that? I don't know, I just remember it. She shrugged, small shoulders rising and falling. Is she nice? Your boss? He thought about that honestly, about the program she had built for people she didn't know yet, about don't thank me for things that should exist, about I kept the date, about the fraction of a second of a real smile when he'd told her about the sunflower on the windowsill. Yeah, he said. She's nice, in her own way. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied. She looked out the window and started telling him about something that had happened at lunch, and he listened and drove and let the evening do what evenings did, hold the day until the day was done. But he was still thinking about a folder set down on a desk, and I've been thinking too, and the particular way those 4 words had sat in the room, like something real. 3 weeks after the Tuesday meeting where they had both said something without quite saying it, Mark arrived at work to find a company-wide email in his inbox with Victoria's name in the sender field. The subject line read, "New family-friendly work policy, effective immediately." He opened it, read it twice. Then he got up, walked to Janet's desk and said nothing. He just held up his phone with the email on the screen. Janet read it. Her eyebrows went up slowly the way they did when she was recalibrating something. "She expanded the childcare network," she said. "Remote work flexibility for single parents during school closures," Mark said. "Emergency family leave paid up to 5 days. A dedicated HR liaison for employees managing solo childcare." He paused. "And a partnership with 3 after-school programs in the district." Janet looked at him over the top of his phone. "Mark, it's a company policy," he said. "It applies to everyone." "It does," she agreed. "And I'm sure it was inspired by the general employee population and has nothing whatsoever to do with a specific single father on the 14th floor." "That's correct," he said, in the voice of a man who was not entirely sure that was correct. He went back to his desk. He read the email a third time. He thought about what it meant for him. Practically the flexibility alone would change 3 or 4 recurring stress points in his weekly schedule. The after-school partnership was within a mile of Lily's school. The emergency leave was something he had never had and had never let himself want, because wanting things you don't have is a particular kind of exhausting. He thought about all of that, and then he thought about the fact that someone had built it, thought it through, drafted the policy, cleared it with HR, and sent it company-wide on a Thursday morning. He opened a new email. Typed, "The new policy. It matters more than I can say in an email. Thank you." He stopped. Added, "I'd like to say it in person if you have 10 minutes today." He sent it before he could revise it into something more professional and therefore less honest. Her reply came in 8 minutes. 3 p.m. Come by. He was at her office at 2:57. Diane waved him in. Victoria was standing at the window with her back to the door, the same posture he'd seen on the day he brought the Westfield proposal. But there was something different in it now, something less sealed. She turned when she heard him. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She came to the small table, rather than her desk, the same choice she'd made the very first day, the one he'd noticed and filed. He was beginning to understand it was her version of a signal. The table meant something different than the desk. "The policy," he said. "It's been in development for about 6 weeks," she said. "It was overdue." "It's going to change things for a lot of people here," he said. "Not just me." "That's the idea." He held her gaze. "But it started with me." She didn't answer for a moment. She had her hands flat on the table, and she was looking at him with the full weight of her attention, and he had been on the receiving end of that attention enough times now that it didn't make him want to look away. It made him want to stay. "I've been in this industry for 18 years, she said finally. "I built most of what I built by treating everything personal as a liability. You keep it separate. You keep it out of the office, off the table, behind the wall. That's how you survive in rooms that weren't built for you." She paused. "And then someone sends a text to the wrong person, and you have this conversation. And you start looking around and seeing what you've been not seeing. People managing things alone that they shouldn't have to manage alone. Not because the support doesn't exist, but because the culture said you don't ask for it." He was quiet. "So yes," she said, "it started with you. And it should have started years ago, and I'm sorry it didn't." She said it directly without deflection. "That's on me." "You're doing it now," he said. "I am," she said. "A little late." "Better late," he said. And then, because the moment had a particular gravity that he was either going to lean into or step back from, and he'd spent enough time stepping back, Victoria. She looked at him. "Chicago," he said. "The restaurant." And then, after the anniversary, the text. "And Tuesday." He stopped. organized himself. "I want to be honest with you about something, and I want you to know that I have thought about this carefully, and I'm not saying it impulsively." She didn't move. She was very still, the way she got still when something mattered. "I have feelings for you," he said, "that are not professional, and I've been aware of them for a while, and I've been trying to figure out what to do with that, and I keep coming back to the same thing, which is that I'm not the kind of person who doesn't say the true thing when the true thing is sitting right there." He exhaled. "So that's the true thing." The room was very quiet. Victoria looked at the table for a moment, then at him. The expression on her face was something he hadn't seen before. Not the managed composure, not the careful distance, but something exposed and real and slightly unsteady, which on her was more startling than tears might have been on someone else. "I know," she said. "I know you know," he said. "I think you've known for a while." "I have," she admitted. "Then I want to ask you something," he said, "and you can tell me if this is a conversation you don't want to have in this office on a Thursday afternoon." "Ask," she said. "What do you want?" he said. "Not what's complicated, not what the policy handbook says about supervisory relationships. What do you actually want?" She held his gaze for a long moment. He watched her make the decision, the specific, identifiable moment when she stopped calculating the perimeter of something and just stepped over it. "I want to know you better," she said, "outside of this office, outside of the account and the pitch deck and the check-ins." A pause. "I want to know Lily, properly." Another pause, smaller. "And I want you to stop filing things away every time we get close to something real." He almost laughed. "You noticed that." "I notice everything," she said. "You know that by now." He did know that. He had known it for months. "I come with complications," he said. "I need you to understand that. Lily is the center of everything. She always will be. And Sarah, I'm not going to pretend that's simple. I loved her. I still do in the way you still do. And starting something real with someone means carrying all of that." "I know," Victoria said. "Does that mark?" She said his name quietly, but clearly the way you say a word when you want it to land without ambiguity. "I'm not asking you to be uncomplicated. I'm asking you to have dinner with me on Saturday." He looked at her. "That's the ask," she said. "Just dinner." He breathed. "Just dinner," he said. "Yes." "Okay," he said. "Saturday." She nodded once. And then, as if the whole conversation had simply concluded a necessary piece of business, she reached for the Westfield quarterly report that was sitting at the edge of the table and slid it toward him. "The mid-quarter numbers. Tell me what you see." He pulled the report toward him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You're something else, you know that," he said. The almost smile, the real one, the brief private one he had first seen in Chicago, "I've been told." They spent 40 minutes on the quarterly report. He drove home that afternoon in a state of mind he didn't have an exact word for. Not happiness, not quite, but something close to it. Something with more weight and more texture than plain happiness. Something that felt like standing on solid ground that he'd worked very hard to get to. He told Lily about dinner on Friday evening. Or rather, he started to tell her, and she interrupted him before he finished the second sentence. "Your boss," she said. "Yes. Saturday. Saturday evening. I'll have you at Mrs. Patterson's by 6. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter, the way he had told her not to sit approximately 400 times watching him make pasta. She had the evaluating expression on the one she'd inherited from Sarah, the one that saw through things. "Is this a date?" she asked. "It's dinner," he said. "Dad." "Lily." "Those are not mutually exclusive," she said in the careful, precise tone that meant she had recently learned a phrase at school and was deploying it intentionally. He pointed at her with the wooden spoon. "You're spending too much time with Janet." "I've never met Janet." "You're developing her rhetorical style independently, which is somehow worse." Lily grinned. Then she went quiet, tracing a pattern on the counter with one finger. And he let the quiet be, because he'd learned to read her silences the same way he'd learned everything about her by paying attention. "Is it weird?" she said finally. "For you?" He stopped stirring. He set the spoon down. He turned and looked at her directly, because she deserved that. "Yes," he said honestly. "A little. Because of Mom. Because of a lot of things," he said. "But yes, partly that." She nodded slowly. "Mrs. Patterson says that love isn't a bucket that runs out," she said. "She says the more you give it, the more you have." He looked at his daughter sitting on the kitchen counter at 8.5 years old, quoting their neighbor's folk wisdom like it was the most natural thing in the world, and he felt something in him simultaneously break and heal the way those two things sometimes happened at the exact same time. "Mrs. Patterson's pretty smart," he said. "I know," Lily said. "She also said Mom would want you to be happy." He picked the spoon back up. His eyes were stinging in a way he was not going to acknowledge in front of a child who was already too perceptive for his emotional comfort. "Pasta's almost ready," he said. "Okay," she said, hopping off the counter with a thud. "But Dad..." "Yeah." "Wear the blue shirt Saturday," she said. "The nice one. Not the one that's also your yard work shirt." "They're different shirts," he said. "They look the same to me." "They are definitively not the same shirt." "Blue shirt," she said firmly and went to set the table. Saturday came. He wore the blue shirt. The restaurant was in the Marina District, quiet and unhurried, the kind of place where the lighting was good and the tables were far enough apart to have a real conversation. Victoria was already there when he arrived. Of course she was. She was always early. He was beginning to understand this was non-negotiable in her. And she stood when he came in, and there was a single beat where they both just looked at each other outside the office in the context of an ordinary evening, and something settled. "You look different," she said, sitting back down. "Good different or concerning different?" "Just different," she said, without the work face. "You look different too," he said. She did. She had on a jacket he hadn't seen, a deep green that was nothing like her office wardrobe, and her hair was down the way it had been in Chicago, and she looked, he tried to find the right word, like herself. Whatever the self was that existed when the CEO exterior was set aside for the night. He found he liked that self very much. They ordered. They talked. It was easy in a way he hadn't expected it to be. Not forced easy. Not the deliberately pleasant ease of two people trying hard, but the organic ease of two people who had been learning each other's language for months and were now just speaking it directly. He told her about how Lily had approved his shirt choice with the authority of someone who had strong opinions about fashion and no interest in dissent. Victoria laughed, the real laugh, the one he'd heard in Chicago, that landed in his chest and stayed there. She told him about growing up in Hartford, Connecticut, the youngest of three, the only one who'd gone into business, the one her family had not entirely understood. Her father had been a high school history teacher. He had wanted her to be happy in a small, manageable way, and she had gone out and built something large instead, and they had loved each other, and not entirely known how to talk to each other for 20 years until he died, which was when she understood that time was the thing you didn't get more of. "I wish I'd had more conversations with him like this," she said. "Just real ones, without the armor." "What stopped you?" he asked. "I thought the armor was who I was," she said. For a very long time. He thought about that. "And now," she looked at him across the table, "now I think the armor is what I learned to wear early. And there's a difference." "There is," he said. "Someone helped me see that," she said. "Recently." He understood she meant him. He didn't say so because some things were better received quietly. "For what it's worth," he said, "the person behind the armor is worth knowing." She held his gaze. "So are you," she said. "You know that, right? You've been so focused on keeping everything standing that I'm not sure you've noticed that you built something real. A real life. A real family. A real..." She stopped. You're a good man, Mark. That's not a small thing." He was quiet for a moment. Sarah had said that to him once in those words. It hit him differently now, not with grief, not with the sharp pull of comparison, but with something that felt strangely like continuity. Like the true things remain true regardless of who said them. "Thank you," he said. "That means it means something coming from you." She smiled. Not the fraction of a second version, not the almost version. A real one held the kind that changed her whole face. He looked at it and thought, there it is. There's the person. They closed the restaurant down. Neither of them noticed until the waiter came by a third time to refill water glasses they hadn't been drinking from. They stood on the sidewalk afterward, in the warm May evening, and he walked her to her car, because that was the kind of man he was. And when they got there, she turned and looked at him, and the city was loud and indifferent around them, and it didn't matter at all. "Lily," she said, "can I meet her properly? Not as your boss." "Yes," he said without hesitating. "She wants to meet you too. She just doesn't know it yet." "What does that mean?" "It means she's been asking about you for 2 months and pretending she's asking casually." Victoria looked at him. "She's definitely your daughter." "She's her own person," he said. "She just has my bad habits." Victoria reached out and touched his arm briefly just above the wrist. A small contact, careful, not quite tentative, but clearly chosen. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "Thank you for asking," he said. She got in her car. He stood on the sidewalk and watched her drive away, and then he walked back to his own car and sat in it for a moment in the particular silence of a night that had gone well. He thought about the email he'd sent in March with the wrong contact. The shattered phone, I assumed. The 15-minute check-ins, and the coffee left silently on his desk, and the program she'd built for people she hadn't met yet. The restaurant in Chicago, and I've been thinking too, and a company-wide policy drafted quietly across 6 weeks. All of it, the whole long thread of it, leading to a green jacket and a real laugh and a hand on his arm for 2 seconds on a sidewalk in May. He picked up his phone. He texted Janet had dinner with Victoria. Her response came in 4 seconds. 3 exclamation marks, and then, I said nothing. He drove to Mrs. Patterson's and picked up Lily, who was awake, even though it was past 9 because Mrs. Patterson had allowed 1 movie, which had become 2. She climbed into the back seat and looked at him with the full evaluating treatment. "Blue shirt," she said approvingly. "Thank you." "How was it?" "Good," he said. "How good?" "Lily." "That good," she said, satisfied, and leaned her head against the window and was asleep before they got home. He carried her inside. He put her to bed. He stood in the doorway of her room in the dark for a moment, and he thought about what she had said in the kitchen. Mrs. Patterson says love isn't a bucket that runs out. And he thought about Sarah's voice saying, your heart isn't a house with 1 room. It just builds another room. And he thought about Victoria on a sidewalk in May, a hand on his arm for 2 seconds. Can I meet her properly? Not as your boss. And for the first time in 3 years, the thought of moving forward didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like building something. He turned off the hall light. He went to bed. And for the first night in longer than he could clearly remember, he fell asleep before he'd had the chance to lie there telling himself all the reasons he shouldn't. The room was built. It had been building for months, probably since the break room. Maybe since the first Tuesday check-in. Maybe since a text message hit the wrong contact, and a woman replied with 2 words and a period, and he had stood in a break room trying to decode them. He understood them now. I assumed she had assumed there was something worth paying attention to, and she had paid attention patiently for months in her own particular way. In policies and programs and coffee left on desks, and a date she'd kept in her memory like something precious and fragile. He had assumed it would be simpler than this, or harder than this, or different in ways he couldn't have predicted. He had been wrong about the simpler. He had been wrong about the harder. He had been exactly right about the different. It was different from anything he had known before. Not better than, not instead of just its own thing, its own weight, its own particular kind of real. And he was finally ready for it. The first time Victoria met Lily properly, the way she had asked to on the sidewalk in May. It was a Saturday morning at the end of the month, and Mark had spent approximately 45 minutes telling himself it was going to be fine. He had planned it carefully, the way he planned everything that mattered. Not a formal occasion. Not a big production. Just breakfast at the house, the three of them, low-pressure, easy exits if anyone needed them. He'd told Lily the night before in plain language. Victoria is coming over tomorrow morning, just for breakfast. She's someone I care about, and I want you two to meet. Lily had looked at him with those steady, clear eyes. Is she nervous? He had not actually considered whether Victoria was nervous. Probably a little, he said. Tell her I don't bite, Lily said. I'll pass that along. He did not pass that along. But he thought about it while he was making pancakes the next morning, and it made him smile in the way that Lily's particular brand of 8-year-old directness always did, with a warmth that was also slightly helpless. Victoria arrived at 9:15. He heard the car, then the knock, and he was at the door before the second one. She was in jeans and a simple shirt, carrying a small paper bag, and she looked. He took this in quietly, in about 2 seconds, like she had thought carefully about what to wear, in order to look like she hadn't thought carefully about what to wear. He appreciated the effort. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. Come in. She stepped inside and looked around in the way people look around a home they've heard about, without having seen, taking stock, matching reality to imagination. He watched her take in the framed photos on the hallway wall, the soccer cleats by the door, the general cheerful disorder of a house that was genuinely lived in. It's good, she said half to herself. What is? It looks like a home, she said simply. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, because she had vetoed getting dressed, and Mark had decided this was not the hill. She stood there with her arms at her sides and her chin slightly lifted, doing the full assessment. Victoria turned and looked at her. For a moment, they just regarded each other, the woman who had run a company for 12 years with nothing softer than a quarterly report in her hands, and the 8-year-old who had made Carol demonstrate pancake technique before approving her for childcare duty. Then Lily said, "Did you bring something?" Victoria held up the paper bag. "Croissants, from the place on Montgomery, if that's okay." Lily considered this. "That's the good one," she said. "With the almond ones?" "2 almond," Victoria said, "in case you wanted both." Lily looked at Mark. The look said plainly, she's fine. Then she turned and went back to the kitchen, calling over her shoulder, "The orange juice is already poured. Dad always makes too much." Victoria looked at Mark. "You're in," he said quietly. "That's it," she said. "Croissants." "Croissants and knowing which bakery," he said. "She has standards." They had breakfast at the kitchen table, the three of them, and it was Mark kept waiting for it to be awkward, kept bracing for the moment where the strangeness of the configuration would surface and he'd have to navigate it. The moment didn't come. What came instead was Lily interrogating Victoria about tomatoes, because Mark had apparently mentioned at some point that Victoria's mother grew them, and Lily had decided this was relevant to the sunflower project currently occupying the kitchen windowsill. "How long has she been trying?" Lily demanded. 9 years, Victoria said. Lily stared. "And they still don't come in right?" "The soil," Victoria said. "She won't amend the soil. She's very stubborn about it." "My sunflower has been in the same spot for 6 months, Lily said, pointing to the windowsill. "Dad says it might not get enough light." Victoria looked at the windowsill, then at Lily. "Have you tried rotating it, turning the pot so the other side faces the window?" Lily looked at the pot, then at Mark with an expression that said very clearly, "Why didn't you know that? I'm not a botanist," he said. They rotated the pot after breakfast. Victoria crouched next to Lily to look at the base of the stem and said something about the root system that Lily received, with the focused seriousness of someone taking notes. Mark stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the two of them, the CEO of a national marketing firm and his daughter in pajamas debating the light requirements of a 6-month-old sunflower, and felt something happen in his chest that was almost too large to hold. He held it anyway. He was getting better at that. Lily showed Victoria the dinosaur sticker collection 30 minutes later. Full access. Unprompted. Mark took this as the highest possible endorsement. Victoria stayed until noon. She and Mark sat at the kitchen table after Lily went to change out of her pajamas, and the conversation went quiet in the way conversations do when people are comfortable enough not to fill the silence. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "You know that." "I know," he said. "She's better than me at most things, and she's 8. 8.5, Victoria said in perfect imitation of Lily's corrective tone, and Mark laughed and Victoria laughed, and for a second the kitchen was full of it. When she left, Lily stood at the door and said, "You can come back." Victoria looked at her. "Thank you, Lily." "Bring the almond ones again," Lily said. "But you don't have to. It's just a preference." "Noted," Victoria said. And the real smile, the one that changed her whole face, was there full and unhurried, and she didn't try to contain it. She walked to her car. Mark stood at the door. He caught her eye just before she got in, and she held his gaze for a moment with an expression that said everything she hadn't said out loud, and he nodded once because he understood it, and she got in and drove away. He closed the door. Lily was already back in the kitchen, rotating the sunflower another 2 degrees. "She's nice," she said without looking up. "Yeah," he said. "She is." "In her own way," Lily said, echoing his exact words from weeks ago back at him, without any apparent awareness that she was doing it. Mark stood in the kitchen doorway and thought, Sarah, you would love this kid so much. He was fairly certain Sarah already knew. The months that followed had a rhythm to them that Mark hadn't experienced since before he lost Sarah, the rhythm of something being built incrementally, piece by piece, with enough care that it didn't feel fragile. He and Victoria settled into something that had no perfect name. Not a secret, not a declaration, not the performed casualness of two people trying to avoid the appearance of what they were. Just real. Present. Consistent. They handled the professional dimension the way two careful adults handle complicated things directly, early, and with documentation. Victoria disclosed the relationship to Horizons board herself before anyone asked, because that was who she was. She restructured Mark's reporting line so that his direct supervisor was the VP of accounts, removing any perception of bias in performance review. She did it cleanly and without drama, and told Mark exactly what she'd done and why. "I want this to be solid," she said. "Not just between us, in every direction." "You didn't have to do all of that," he said. "I know I didn't have to," she said. "That's not why I did it." He understood. She was building on solid ground the same way he had always built, no shortcuts, no foundations you weren't willing to defend. He had never respected anyone more for anything. The Westfield account continued to perform. By August, the campaign metrics were tracking 30% above their benchmark, and Richard Park sent a letter, an actual letter on paper, which Victoria said she hadn't received from a client in 4 years, commending the work specifically and requesting a proposal for a second engagement. Mark sat with that letter in his hands for a solid minute before putting it down. He sent Victoria a text. Park sent a letter. A real one. Her reply. "Frame it." He framed it. It went on the wall next to his desk, which several colleagues noticed and commented on, and which he found himself looking at on hard days with the particular satisfaction of something built right. The sunflower bloomed in September. He was at work when Lily called from Mrs. Patterson's, which she was technically not supposed to do on the after-school phone, but Mrs. Patterson had clearly allowed it because the occasion warranted it. "Dad." Her voice was at the particular pitch it hit when she was trying to contain something large. "The sunflower." "Yeah. It's open. It actually opened. Like a real one." He closed his eyes for a second. "I'll see it tonight, Bug." "It's so yellow, Dad," she said. "It's really, really yellow." "I believe you." Mrs. Patterson cried a little. "Tell Mrs. Patterson she's allowed." He texted Victoria from his desk. The sunflower came in, and then after a moment, 6.5 months. Lily's very proud. The response came back in 2 minutes. Not words, just a photograph. Victoria's phone pointed at her computer screen, where she had apparently pulled up an image of a sunflower with a single caption beneath it. "Tell her I said well done." He showed Lily the text that evening. Lily read it, looked at the photo, and said, "She gets it." "She does," Mark agreed. "Not everyone gets it," Lily said. "Some people would just say nice flower." She said well done. "That's different." "It is different," he said. "I like her," Lily said, as if she hadn't been communicating this in every possible indirect way for 3 months, as if it were new information. She went back to her homework with the slightly smug expression of someone who had been right about something and was enjoying being right. October came. The air turned the particular cool and copper color that had always been Sarah's favorite season, and Mark moved through it the way he moved through the anniversary every year, with intention, with presence, with Lily at the center of it. But this October was different in a way he had not expected. It wasn't harder. It was, if anything, more complete. Like the grief had found its proper dimensions at last, still real, still present, but no longer filling every room. He visited Sarah's grave on the 15th alone in the early morning before Lily was awake. He brought sunflowers. He sat on the bench nearby for a while and talked the way he had never quite managed to do in the first years. Not dramatically. Not with the desperate one-sided intensity of acute grief, but quietly. The way you talk to someone you trust with the real version of things. He told her about Westfield, about the letter on the wall, about the sunflower coming in yellow, and really, really yellow, for 2 seconds on a sidewalk in May. For 2 seconds on a sidewalk in May. He said, "I don't know if this is the right thing, but it feels like the right thing. And you always said I was better at knowing the right thing than I believed I was." The morning was quiet. The trees were doing what trees do in October. He sat there for a while longer. Then he said, "She's good, Sarah. She's someone you'd respect. That's not nothing." He drove home. He made breakfast. Lily came down in her dinosaur socks and ate with the efficiency of someone who had places to be. And when she looked up and saw his face, she said, "You okay, Dad?" And he said, "Yeah, Bug, I'm really okay." And she held the look for one careful moment and then nodded satisfied and went back to her cereal. He was really okay. That was the true thing, and he said it because the true thing mattered. The proposal happened on a Sunday in November. Not his proposal, hers. He would tell Janet this later, and Janet would say of course it was hers, and he would not entirely disagree. They were at his house. Lily was at a birthday party at a classmate's until 5, which gave them the afternoon, and they had spent it doing the kind of domestic ordinary thing that Mark had quietly come to love, cooking together, talking about nothing important, the radio on in the background. Victoria had over the past months developed an unexpectedly strong opinion about the correct way to make chicken soup, which was a detail about her that delighted him unreasonably. She was washing dishes. He was drying. It was 3 in the afternoon, November light through the window, the soup on the stove. She turned off the water and turned to face him. And there was something in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Not the managed composure. Not the real smile. Not the unguarded moment. Something new. Something that sat at the intersection of complete certainty and visible vulnerability. The two things that rarely occupied the same face at the same time. "I want to ask you something," she said. He set the dish down. He turned to face her fully. "Okay." "I'm not good at this," she said. I don't have a practiced version of this. I want you to know that I thought about it, and I don't have a speech prepared, which is probably the most I've ever gone into anything without being prepared, and I think that's actually the correct way to do it." He watched her. He didn't speak. He gave her the room. "I want to build something with you," she said. "With you and Lily. Not in a theoretical someday way. Concretely. I want to be in this house on Sunday afternoons. I want to know what Lily wants to be when she grows up, and I want to be there when she changes her mind 6 times. I want to figure out the things we haven't figured out yet." She paused. "I want to be your family, if you'll let me." The kitchen was quiet. The soup was on the stove. The November light came through the window and lit up the space between them in that particular way that Sarah used to call honey light. He thought about a break room in March and a shattered phone, and I assumed. He thought about 15-minute check-ins and coffee left on a desk, and the program she had built for people she hadn't met. He thought about Chicago, about a restaurant 2 blocks from a hotel, about the door that opened and hadn't closed. He thought about a woman crouching next to his daughter to look at the base of a sunflower stem, about well done sent as a photograph, about I've been thinking too in a glass-walled office on a Tuesday afternoon. He thought about Sarah saying, "Your heart isn't a house with 1 room, it just builds another room," and Lily saying love isn't a bucket that runs out, and Mrs. Patterson crying at a yellow sunflower, and himself in a car in the driveway on the night of the anniversary, thinking the door had opened and he hadn't closed it. He crossed the kitchen and took her face in his hands gently, the way you hold something you've been careful with for a long time and are finally holding without reservation. "Yes," he said. She put her hands over his and closed her eyes for 1 second, and when she opened them, the expression on her face was the most completely herself he had ever seen her. No armor, no management, no calculation. Just this. Just her. Just the real person who had been there all along behind the blazer and the glass office and the 2-word replies and the careful, deliberate patience of someone who understood that the things worth having were worth waiting for. "Yes," he said again, because it felt right to say it twice. When Lily came home at 5, Mark was on the couch and Victoria was in the kitchen finishing a second batch of soup, and Lily stood in the doorway with the particular alert stillness she got when she was reading a room. She read it. She looked at her father. She looked at Victoria. "Something happened," she said. "Something happened," Mark confirmed. Lily set her party favor bag on the floor very carefully in the manner of someone who wanted both hands free for whatever came next. She looked at Victoria. "Are you staying?" she said, like more than usual. Victoria came to the kitchen doorway and looked at Lily directly with all of her attention, the way she gave people her full attention when the thing being said mattered. "If that's okay with you," she said. "I'd like to." Lily stood there for a moment. 8.5-years-old dinosaur socks, a small smear of birthday cake frosting on her sleeve that she hadn't noticed. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn steadiness, and her own particular irreplaceable self that belonged to no one but her. "Okay," she said. "Then, can we have soup for dinner?" "Already made," Victoria said. Lily considered this for 1 more second, apparently found everything in order, and went to wash her hands. Mark looked at Victoria from the couch. She looked back at him. The kitchen was warm, and the soup was on the stove, and outside the November evening was settling in the way November evenings do slowly fully, like something that had been on its way for a long time, and had finally arrived. She said okay, Victoria said quietly to herself as much as to him. She said okay, he confirmed. They had dinner, the 3 of them, at the kitchen table that had seen 5 years of mornings and homework and the long, quiet grief of learning to live in a house that had lost one of its people. The table that had also seen a wrong text message decoded over a glass of water and a sunflower rotated 2 degrees toward the light, and the first croissants from the bakery on Montgomery, and 100 small ordinary moments adding up to something that was unmistakably a life. Lily talked about the birthday party, the cake, the games, a minor injustice involving a prize wheel that she recounted with considerable detail and feeling. Victoria listened and asked follow-up questions in exactly the right places, the same way she listened in every meeting she'd ever run with full focus. Nothing held back. Mark watched the two of them and felt the full weight of it, the whole long accumulation of everything that had led to this table on this evening. Later after dinner, after Lily had gone to bed, with the particular satisfied completeness of a child whose day had been fully used, Mark and Victoria sat on the back porch in the November cold with their coats on and cups of coffee. They weren't really drinking. The city hummed quietly somewhere beyond the fence line. A few stars were visible through the clouds. "I'm not going to be perfect at this," Victoria said after a while. "Nobody is," he said. "I mean specifically," she said. "I'm going to be better at the big moments than the small daily ones. I've never this kind of life. The dailiness of it is not something I've practiced." "I'll teach you," he said. She looked at him. "You're not worried." "About what?" "About all of it," she said. "The complication, the balance, how it changes things." He thought about it honestly, the way he had learned to think about the things that mattered, not to minimize them, not to make them artificially manageable, but to see them clearly and move toward them anyway. "I'm not worried," he said. "I was worried for a long time, but I know who you are now. I've watched you build things for months, the program, the policy, the patience. You build things right. I trust that." She was quiet. "And Lily trusts you," he said. "And her read on people has never been wrong." Victoria looked out at the dark yard. "She gets that from you." "She gets it from her mother," he said. "I'm just the one who remembered to pass it on." She reached over and took his hand, and he held it, and they sat in the November cold on the back porch of the house where he had learned to live again, and the silence between them was the particular kind that doesn't need filling. The kind that is itself a kind of language, one that takes a long time to learn and is worth every moment of the learning. He thought about a man in a break room in March staring at a shattered phone screen, his career and his carefully constructed life feeling suddenly like glass underfoot. He thought about how far that man had walked since then, and how many times he had chosen to keep walking when stopping would have been easier, and how the path had led not in spite of the grief and the fear and the years of holding everything up alone, but somehow through them to exactly here. To a woman's hand in his, to a sleeping child in the room down the hall, to a sunflower on the windowsill that had taken 6.5 months to bloom and had come in really, really yellow. He had sent the wrong text. He had dropped his phone and cracked the screen and stood in a break room at 7:54 in the morning with his life tilting off its axis, and he had thought it was the beginning of a disaster. He had been wrong. It was the beginning of everything else. And as November settled in around the house, and Victoria's hand stayed warm in his, and the city went on being itself, beyond the fence line, Mark Collins understood, with the complete, unambiguous clarity of a man who had learned the hard way to recognize the true thing, that the best chapters of a life are rarely the ones you plan. They are the ones that start with an accident, and a question you couldn't decode, and a door you chose not to close. They are the ones that ask everything of you, and give everything back,